Most of the work we're going to do to be ready for pandemic 2, I call this pandemic 1, most of the work we'll do to be ready for that are also the things we need to do to minimize the threat of bioterrorism.
Well, crazy times, folks, crazy times. Like I keep saying, every day there's just more news. I got something wrong on the last video as well. I just went with what it said on the video clip that I used about the protest at the White House. Apparently it wasn't the White House, it was the Capitol building, I think. Or someone else said it was Ohio, but whatever it was some sort of government building. The situation's pretty drastic in the United States, folks, and it's getting pretty drastic here as well. There were massive protests in Brisbane yesterday. I was quite surprised when I saw the paper this morning. There were 30,000 people protesting in Brisbane on Saturday. I personally didn't even hear that it was happening, so they seem to have covered it up quite well. There were also huge protests in Byron Bay. I was quite inspired when I saw that, but then I looked a little deeper, and the protests were for, you guessed it, Black Lives Matter. That's what it was all about. It wasn't about the lockdown, it wasn't about COVID, it wasn't about anything that we would hope it would be. It was about Black Lives Matter. And, you know, you've got 30,000 people on the streets of Brisbane or, you know, and in Byron Bay and all over the place protesting this killing of George Floyd in Minnesota. And so the focus has been shifted and been hijacked over to, you know, a racial protest, a racially motivated protest, and not people paying attention to the situation that we're in. And, you know, there's a deeper play to all this. You know, they wouldn't get out and they wouldn't protest the fascism that they're all being subject to, but they'll get out there and they'll do a manufactured protest to focus on a racial issue. You know, and this is going to be used to, it's going to be used against the people is what they're going to do, folks. You know, there's all this stuff going on here in Australia. You know, we've beat the virus, we've done all these things, we kept the social distancing in place. Now you've got all these people that went and gathered in Brisbane, 30,000 people who all broke the lockdown and broke the social distancing guidelines. These people are going to be blamed for an outbreak of coronavirus that happens in Brisbane. You watch. I said on the last report that I uploaded, I'm expecting some event in Brisbane because there seems to be a lot of attention on Brisbane at the moment, a lot of attention on Queensland at the moment, and I'm expecting them to stage some event in Brisbane. And then the very next day, this whole protest happens. I wake up and someone sends me this newspaper of the Sunday Mail of this protest that was happening in Brisbane yesterday. 30,000 people. All of these people, I bet they had their cell phones on them. When they declare another cluster in Brisbane, they'll be able to go back and trace all of those people, and they'll be able to blame them on the outbreak. Perhaps that will be the way it's run. Perhaps they'll just stage some event, I don't know. But I'm fully expecting something to be staged in Brisbane. You know, the way they're going to do this, folks, see, with this whole shift over to the racial focus, they've managed to cause this huge outbreak of violence in the United States, you know, virtually on the verge of civil war in the United States. And they've got everybody to break their social distancing guidelines, which are all complete rubbish anyway. I mean, there's no reason for any of this social distancing to be there, but it's there in order for them to run the scam that they're running. So, you know, that's what's going on. And they'll be able to use this to say, this is what's caused the cluster, this is what has caused the outbreak. So, you just watch how things are going to be played. You know, the whole talk is September. Peacocks in the yard, folks. May as well stop and show you the peacocks for a moment. And up on the tank here, that's Billy on the tank. He likes to fly around a bit. Hey Billy, what are you doing? You gonna come down and say hello? Maybe not. But they'll be able to use this. They will be able to use this to say the people are responsible for the next outbreak. And I reckon it's going to be in Brisbane. Brisbane or the Gold Coast, probably Brisbane, because that's where this protest was held, the main gathering was held. And what's happening with the riots in the United States, this is so contrived, folks. All the people who are actually marching because they care about George Floyd are not the people who are destroying things and overturning cars and smashing buildings. This is destroying all the infrastructure. It's destroying all the department stores, all the food stores. Where are people going to be getting their supplies from if all of this is destroyed? Where are the food trucks going to have to bring these supplies to if all of this infrastructure is destroyed? And with the way the police are being portrayed as being completely violent, and they are, and so now we need to defund them. They're talking about defunding the police in Minnesota. We're moving funding from LA police. I talked about this on the last report. Again, this will lead to the need to bring in the military, very likely, while they're setting up a private police force. But what will that private police force be? I mean, ultimately, all this is going to move towards AI. That's what it will all move towards in the end. You have a private police force based on social credit, and they've already got the robot dogs coming out, wandering around.
For those around you, please stand at least 1 meter apart. Thank you. Let's keep Singapore healthy. For your own safety and for those around you, please stand at least 1 meter apart. Thank you.
How long before we get robot police officers as well? Should we get a situation, something like Elysium? Something like that. It's all based on social crediting. It's all based on contact tracing. It's all based on surveillance and all based on AI. People aren't looking at all this that's still going on underneath. While all of these riots and protests and all this Black Lives Matter stuff is going on, all the COVID stuff is still rolling out. California is coming back online. It's reopening a little bit, but it's going to be very different, folks, because you're going to have social distancing in all the restaurants. It's going to be very, very different. And how many of those people that go to the restaurants have been involved in the riots? When you look at the contact tracing, and they're still hiring thousands of people to do this. None of this has gone away. None of the steps that have been put in place for COVID have gone away simply because these riots have taken place. All they've done is they've managed to shift people's focus. It's important that people see this. There's always a bigger picture. There's always a bigger play. When you look at the World Economic Forum website and you look at the plans for the COVID response plan that goes 32 layers deep, and you look at every contingency, it's all been planned for. You go to the global governance section and you can find they've taken into account dissent, civil unrest, what the response will be to deal with this. There's actually a video. I can't remember who it's by. I'll think of the name and I'll put it on the screen here, and I'll put a link to it. I found it on BitChute, and it's called something like COVID-19 is a Zionist communist takeover or something like that. I can't remember offhand. But he actually goes through a pretty good rundown of what's in the COVID response plan in the World Economic Forum, and I think he actually even shows you the video that I talked about, the video that shows you this has been a 50-year plan that's been in the making for 50 years, this whole COVID response plan. This isn't anything that they just came up with.
We face a global health emergency. The unprecedented spread of COVID-19 is disrupting lives and economies in every part of the world. It will impact every one of us, and the sum of individual actions won't be enough to stop it. Gathering actors from the public, private sectors, and civil society to work towards a common goal has been at the heart of the World Economic Forum's work for almost 50 years. This is why we are launching the COVID Action Platform, a unique coalition that will address the crisis in 3 main ways.
It's a plan that's been 50 years in the making. So, you know, it's all there on that video. I'll put a link to that below so you can go and check it out. But I just think it's really important that people pay attention to the bigger picture here and how they're being played and what this whole, you know, this whole protests and riots, it's all about. You know, I said back in the beginning of this that America is the prize here. They want to bring down the United States. They really want to bring it down. Oh, look at this. This is Bree. Hello, Bree. Hello, Bree. You want to say hello to everybody, Bree? This is Bree. Bree is very excitable. Can't get Bree on camera because Bree won't stop moving. There she is. Maybe you can see her there. There you are. You going to say hello? You going to say hello to everybody? No, you don't want to? Oh, well. Hard to control a little Kelpie dog, folks. She's a lovely little dog. And I've completely lost track of what I was saying. You interrupted me. Go away. Come on. What are you doing? There she is. Hey. Come and say hello. You disturbed me and lost my train of thought completely. Say hello to everybody. Okay, well, that's the dog, folks. But yeah, people are being completely distracted with what's going on here. Motorbikes, Sunday, folks, it's the way it goes out here. And I've completely lost track of what I was talking about. So I might come back to this in a little while. I'll talk to you soon. Hi folks, it's now tomorrow. Just completely lost track of things yesterday. Dogs, visitors, no chance of getting a video done. So it's now the next day. Sorry about that. But I thought I'd share it with you anyway, the mishaps of recording videos. But what I was attempting to get to, what I was coming to yesterday was what's going on with these riots. I mean, this is so multi-layered what they're doing here. You know, the riots are not only destroying infrastructure and, you know, obviously creating a lot of violence, creating a need for major police activity, but they're also putting people into a position where they're all breaking the lockdown and they've very likely all got their cell phones on them. And when you look at the contact tracing that is coming into being, this is what's going to be used against them. You know, this is how they can perform the next stage of the operation. You know, how do they round everybody up? How do they claim, you know, the excuse for there being another outbreak after all this lockdown that everybody's been through? How can they say, well, suddenly there was this huge second wave? How can they make that happen? They have to get people to perceivably break the rules so that, you know, they can be blamed for the second outbreak. This is what happens when you indulge in civil disobedience. Look what happens, folks. You go out there and you protest, and suddenly, well, now you're all sick and it's all your own fault and we're going to have to lock you down even more. And not only that, they can trace all of the rioters and protesters and they can blame all of these people for locking everybody else down. And all of the soccer mums and Karens and Aarons and all the people that go along with what the government is saying and all the TV and the media will blow it right out of proportion. And then they can go and round all these people up, you see. You know, they plan these things so far in advance and they plan for every contingency when they're laying these plans out. And this is a very, very significant year, ladies and gentlemen, and unless we can get some focus on the bigger issues and stop arguing over details, and it's even like with the people arguing over George Floyd, whether he died, whether it was an actor, it's irrelevant, folks. It's what's been set into motion due to that event, why it was staged in the first place and what it's going to be used for. And they'd love you to be sitting there arguing over the details. That's all they want you to do. Argue over the details, look for all the symbolism, look for all this stuff, and don't pay attention to what's happening, and don't dare attempt to actually stop what's happening, just look at the details. Get involved in the spy novel version of reality and look at all the secret messages. That's why they put them there. You know, I did a show a few years ago called How the Magic Works. You know, all of the symbolisms and signs and things that are put there for us to see. And, you know, the whole concept is, well, this is a form of magic, how it's used to control us, but how does it work? And I pointed out then that how it works is it keeps you looking for it. Keeps you involved in looking for all this stuff and not looking at the bigger picture or addressing the situation that you're actually in. You just keep looking for this symbolism, which is why it's there. It's just one of the reasons why you're taught to read. Your reading is spelling. It's all a spell. The whole thing is a spell. Even this belief we have in the law they write down on paper, it's all just spells, folks. There's only one law, and that is natural law, that God's law, do no harm. That's it. Cause no harm, injury, or loss to another. That's the only law. So, you know, I guess you could throw unconditional love in there. I mean, I like to say unconditional love and service to creation. And if we can look at things that way, I think, you know, we can find a way out of this. You know, but as I've been saying, folks, the big thing that they're doing here is shifting people's focus away from the issue at hand, which is the rollout of this COVID response plan, which is essentially a worldwide fascist, communist, totalitarian, socialist, whatever you want to call it, whatever ism you want to pick, it's mass control on all levels, on all fronts, over every single aspect of the human experience. And it means complete social isolation for every human being from here on in. That's the issue. You know, all of these race wars are just a distraction. The race riots, it's just a distraction. They want you to destroy the infrastructure. They want you to make it very, very difficult for you to be able to get through what's coming, which is what's happening with all the riots through the United States. They're just breaking down the infrastructure and making sure the food trucks won't be able to run. You know, the shops won't be able to sell them what they need to survive because the shops will all be destroyed by them, by their own hand. This will make them more dependent upon the state. It also means that they were all out there breaking the social distancing guidelines, like I said, so it makes them all targets for arrest. And it also puts the blame on them for increasing the lockdown. They're very clever the way they play things, folks, and it's also contrived. You know, there was a great video that was put out, a report put out by Veritas. I'm sure many people have seen it now. It was someone who snuck into an Antifa meeting, you know, got in there and snuck a camera in there and went through the training courses. And, you know, they're teaching people for eye gouging and, you know, how to create damage. That's what Antifa is about, is going out there and creating damage, hurting people, making sure things are violent, making sure things are destroyed. And all this is about is transferring power to the state. That's the only purpose of doing anything like that. So be very careful how you're being played, folks, and be very careful not to let your attention shift too far away from what's actually going on here. Billy, come and say hello to everyone. Here's Billy, folks. Here you go, mate. You gonna say a few words? No? Just kind of wandering around. Where are you? There you are. Sorry, folks, I don't have a big screen on this. Look, I don't have any cell phone or anything attached to it, so it gets very difficult to see what I'm actually looking at sometimes on the screen. But yeah, like it's important that people don't lose focus on what's really going on here, folks, and don't lose focus on the bigger picture. Don't be so easily led. And don't get so caught up in the details. You know, this is what destroyed the 9/11 truth movement. People arguing over the details. You know, oh, if it wasn't 19 hijackers, then who was it? And if it wasn't, you know, controlled demolition, or if it was controlled demolition, then what was it? Was it thermite? Was it directed energy weapons? Was it micro nukes? Was it this? Was it that? It doesn't matter. What we know it wasn't was we know it wasn't 19 hijackers, you know, and it wasn't what the government said. And it's the same with all of these things, folks. They want you arguing over the details. That's why they put all the clues there. That's why they make the characters so controversial. I'm sure that's why they used Derek Chauvin and George Floyd, because of the connection the people had together. I mean, it keeps the conspiracy theorists going for months, keeps everybody arguing over the details, and nobody pays attention to the bigger picture because they're all too caught up fighting. And if anybody disagrees with any detail that anybody else thinks, you know, and it gets to the point where you start talking about the issue and saying, well, this is how they're using the murder of George Floyd. And even if you say that sentence, people will attack you and say, well, he wasn't murdered, so you're disinformation. They're not looking at the bigger picture. You know, it's got to the point where you can't even construct a sentence these days without people trying to pull it apart and read some secret conspiratorial meaning into it. It's ridiculous. You know, we've got to see what's going on, folks. We're at such a pivotal point in history. We really are. And it's so important that people see the bigger picture with all of this. It really is. I'm not sure what this is. Some sort of orchid, I think, growing off this jacaranda tree. Interesting. Interesting. But yeah, you know, we've got to pay attention, folks. So yeah, just don't be so easily led, and look at where this is going to go. You know, one of the most important things I think we can do is just continue to point out to people that the death figures are all wrong. You know, the politicians themselves have been saying that, you know, it doesn't matter what you die of, we're putting it down as COVID. Even if you died of clear other causes, we're still putting it down as a COVID death. You know, and that there aren't, you know, a lot of the people they're even putting down aren't being tested. There's even talk that George Floyd tested positive for COVID. So are they going to put that down as a COVID death? I mean, they say that anybody who tests positive for COVID, if they have COVID at the time of death, then it's a COVID death. So does that mean being killed by someone on the side of the road means it's a COVID death? I mean, you know, how far can they play this? But I think it's important to let people know that they're fudging the figures, and it's important to question all of these guidelines of social distancing and all of this wearing of masks. WHO is now saying that, yes, people should always wear masks in public. Well, they need to show proof of claim, because you can ask any doctor, wearing masks is bad for your health. This is reckless endangerment of public health. Any legislation that is calling for this is reckless endangerment of public health, and it's going to keep going until we push back, folks. So, you know, push back, refuse to wear these masks, get them to offer you proof of claim. And it isn't because some politician said so, it isn't because the WHO said so. Who's the head of the WHO? Is he a doctor? How can he give out medical advice? The WHO is a Bill Gates funded entity. Remember, Bill Gates gave them $50 million just before they declared a pandemic.
Well, here's what the Gates Foundation has given to the World Health Organization and related organizations. Okay, 395 grants totaling $3.6 billion to the WHO. He pledged up to $100 million for the global response to COVID-19. He pledged $279 million to the Institute for Health Metrics and the Evaluation at the University of Washington. That's that IHME model that, of course, initially, wasn't all that accurate in predicting what was going on with this virus. And he gave $13.5 million in grants to the CDC Foundation. People think the CDC is just a kind of an independent government agency, but they get money from the Gates Foundation. So it seems like Gates has his hand in pretty much everything pandemic-related, Cheryl.
Well, here's an interesting tie. So Bill Gates, for the longest of times, wanted to have the World Health Organization declare coronavirus a pandemic. And the World Health Organization did not want to do that. So a day after Bill Gates, through his foundation, announced an infusion of $50 million into something called the Therapeutic Accelerator to help fight coronavirus and find a vaccine, much of that money to go toward the World Health Organization. One day after that announcement, the World Health Organization Secretary General came out and declared coronavirus a pandemic.
So, you know, The whole thing's contrived, folks, and it's up to us to push back. The politicians aren't going to help you. The politicians are not your friends. Not anywhere. There is no political remedy for any of this, and there never will be. But anyway, that's about all I wanted to share with you today, folks. I'm really sick of talking about COVID. I really am. I wish there was some positive news on the horizon. I mean, there is an awakening, like I said. I mean, it's been polluted with a lot of stuff. People aren't keeping the focus on what the real issue is. You know, again, they're being tied up in details, but at least there is some sort of an awakening happening. It'll just be interesting to see where it goes for the rest of this year. A lot of air traffic today, folks, for some reason. Don't usually have air traffic over here. But it's interesting to see where it goes, folks. I really hope people do get some focus on the real issues in this soon. I'm seeing a lot of pushback from the mainstream media. You know, the mainstream media are doing lots of hit pieces on people that are speaking out here in Australia. They're doing lots of hit pieces on Pete Evans, the chef, and they're doing hit pieces on Thanos that I had on my show a couple of weeks ago as well. So, you know, this is damage control because a lot of people are waking up to the facts. They're trying to claim it's conspiracy theory, of course, when it's not a conspiracy theory. It's simply people looking at the facts and looking at the figures and realizing that what the government is saying doesn't stack up and that this has not been an overreaction. It's been a planned reaction. And that's a good thing, and that's kind of good to see them even having to do these type of hit pieces because, like I said, it's damage control. So it means we're making a difference. So yeah, just keep pushing, folks, but be careful, like I said, of going to these protests and falling into this trap. You know, when you're doing it, don't forget that they're planning on a second wave and they need some people to blame that second wave on, and that all of the contact tracing is still in place and it's sure to be used, all as part of the same thing. You know, all of these little fingers of the hands meshed together, folks. And, you know, they're not letting people go out and have protests for no reason. I mean, these protests in Brisbane were approved, I believe, by whatever its name is, the Premier of the state. It approved these protests to be run. So obviously it wants to use this gathering of people as an excuse for the second wave. You know, even with that, it may not even just be a second wave, it may be something else. I'm fully expecting something to happen in Brisbane soon anyway. I just feel it. But anyway, folks, I'll leave it there for now. Please take very good care until I speak to you next time, and thank you for joining me on this talk today, and I'll bring you another report in the next day or two. In Lakesh.
Hello, useless eaters. As your unqualified, non-elected global human health overlord, I'd like to take this opportunity to flaunt my position of power and influence over society and share some of my plans for you and your future. When I amassed my fortune in computer software, I demonstrated that I was willing to lie, steal code, cheat my partners, and exercise monopolistic control to destroy my competitors. Now that I've retired, I can rebrand myself as a humanitarian. With my for-profit foundation masquerading as a charity, I can advocate for population reduction and sponsor mass human experiments with unproven vaccines in vulnerable populations. Like my father, a powerful banker, eugenicist, and Rockefeller crony himself, it's always been my ambition to decide who lives and, more importantly, how many have to die. Whether it's under the guise of climate change or world health, it's really all about controlling and culling the human herd for fun and profit. In November of last year, I hosted Event 201, a war game simulation of a global pandemic. Leaders from private corporations, global banks, governments, and the media got together to strategize ways they could align in lockstep when responding to a worldwide health crisis. Using a coordinated campaign of fear-mongering, intimidation, social shaming, and economic blackmail, We realized we could get around dangerous philosophies like individual liberty and national sovereignty. With an obedient population, we would be free to implement our own top-down solutions, like forced quarantines, social distancing, contact tracing, and mandatory testing, as a means to seize technocratic control of society. Now imagine my excitement when we had the opportunity to declare our own global pandemic. It was my chance to look like the Nostradamus of public health and to position myself and business partners like Dr. Fauci as the de facto authorities on response and solutions. Through exaggerated doomsday scenarios and computer simulations, our petty control freaks instituted harsh rules and draconian lockdowns. Even after our dire predictions proved false, scared and well-meaning people continued to submit to the arbitrary and foolish demands of their so-called leaders. Having achieved global lockdown and medical martial law, we will continue to hold hostage your ability to congregate, work, travel, or do just about anything until we're prepared to roll out our bigger plan. I'd like to call this Pandemic 1, because believe me, we have others in the works. Our final solution is to have you begging for us to vaccinate, tag, and digitally track each one of you like livestock. Not only will my foundation enjoy legal immunity and trillions in profits, but these mandatory experimental vaccines will move us so much further down the road to absolute centralized global control. If only my good friend Jeffrey Epstein had been here to celebrate with me aboard the Lolita Express. So remember, global citizens, this will end when I say it ends. Could be a year, maybe 2 years, maybe never. I guarantee that if we have our way, it will be at least until you're not able to do anything to stop it. Just surrender your personal freedom and common sense to our fear merchants in government and the media, because none of this works unless you all go along with it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm off to do some augmented reality spirit cooking with Marina Abramovich. Bye now.